The first bullet tore through the saloon window just as Miranda Keller reached for her cloak, and she knew with cold certainty that Vincent had finally come to collect what he believed she owed him. She did not wait to see his face or hear his threats, did not pause to gather anything more than the worn leather satchel she kept packed beneath her bed for precisely this moment. The winter of 1883 had descended upon Bonanza, Colorado with vengeful fury, transforming the mountain town into a treacherous labyrinth of ice and shadow. But Miranda had no choice except to run. She burst through the back door of the boarding house where she had been hiding for 3 weeks, her boots finding purchase on snow-slicked planks as another gunshot cracked through the brittle air behind her. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs as she plunged into the alley behind the row of weathered buildings that constituted Bonanza's main thoroughfare. Her cloak whipped around her legs as wind howled down from the peaks surrounding the mining town, carrying with it fresh flurries that stung her exposed cheeks. Miranda did not look back. Looking back meant hesitation, and hesitation meant death or worse. Vincent Chambers was not a man who forgave debts, real or imagined, and he certainly would not forgive the woman who had testified against his brother in Denver 3 months prior. Her father had been an honest man, a banker who had discovered irregularities in the Chambers family accounts and had paid for that discovery with his life. The official report called it a hunting accident, but Miranda had been 22 years old and far from naive. She had watched her father grow increasingly anxious in the weeks before his death, had seen the threatening letters he tried to hide, had heard him speaking in hushed tones with the marshal about evidence he planned to present. When they brought his body back draped over his own horse, a single bullet wound in his back, Miranda had known the truth. She had testified despite the threats, despite the fear, because her father had raised her to believe in justice. The jury had convicted Thomas Chambers of fraud and conspiracy, though they could not prove murder, and he now sat in a territorial prison serving 15 years. Vincent had sworn vengeance in the courtroom, his face twisted with rage as he pointed at Miranda and promised she would regret her words. The marshal in Denver had assured her she would be protected, but protection only extended so far when a determined man had money and connections throughout Colorado territory. Miranda had fled Denver under cover of darkness, changing her name, dyeing her chestnut hair darker, making her way through a series of small towns where she hoped to disappear. Bonanza had seemed perfect with its remote location high in the Rockies, its population of miners and merchants too focused on silver ore and survival to ask many questions about a quiet young woman who kept to herself. She had found work mending clothes and cooking meals at the boarding house, saving every penny, planning her next move. But Vincent had found her anyway. Someone must have recognized her, must have sent word, and now she was running again with nothing but the clothes on her back and the few dollars hidden in her satchel. The snow fell heavier now, thick flakes that obscured her vision and muffled sound. This might have been a blessing, except that the same snow that covered her tracks also made the terrain deadly. Bonanza sat at nearly 10,000 feet in elevation, and winter this high could kill as efficiently as any bullet. She stumbled past the last building on the edge of town, past the blacksmith's forge that sat dark and cold in the late afternoon gloom, and found herself facing the wilderness. The main road that led down to other settlements was surely being watched. Vincent would have men positioned there, expecting her to flee in that direction. Her only option was to head up into the mountains, to lose herself in the forest and hope to circle back to another trail once darkness fell. The decision made, Miranda pushed forward into the trees. Pine and aspen stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with accumulated snow. Her breath came in ragged gasps, creating clouds of vapor that hung in the frigid air. She could no longer feel her fingers despite her gloves, and her skirts grew heavy and stiff as snow accumulated on the fabric. Still she climbed, using tree trunks for support, her boots sinking deep into drifts that sometimes reached her knees. Time lost meaning. The world contracted to the next step, the next breath, the desperate need to keep moving. Miranda knew she could not stop, knew that to rest meant to freeze. She had heard stories of miners found in spring, perfectly preserved in ice, victims of Colorado's brutal winters. The snow continued to fall, and she realized with growing horror that she could no longer see her own footprints behind her. The storm was erasing all evidence of her passage, which meant she was also erasing any chance of finding her way back. Panic fluttered in her chest, but she forced it down. Panic killed as surely as cold. She needed to think, needed to find shelter. There were old mining claims scattered throughout these mountains, abandoned cabins where prospectors had given up their dreams of silver fortune. If she could find one, she might survive the night. But the snow fell thicker, and the temperature dropped as daylight began to fail. The forest around her transformed into a maze of white and shadow, every direction looking identical to the last. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. She had been running for hours now, climbing steadily higher, and her body was reaching its limits. Miranda paused beside a massive boulder, trying to catch her breath, trying to orient herself. The wind screamed through the trees, and she realized she could no longer feel her feet. This was bad. This was very bad. She needed to descend, needed to find lower elevation, but she had become disoriented in the whiteout conditions. She forced herself to move again, choosing a direction that seemed to slope downward. Her movements grew clumsy, uncoordinated. She fell once, then twice, struggling back to her feet each time with increasing difficulty. The cold had moved beyond pain into a strange numbness that frightened her more than anything Vincent could do. At least a bullet would be quick. Freezing was a slow surrender, a gradual shutting down of all the systems that kept a person alive. Miranda fell a third time and found she could not rise. Her legs simply would not obey the commands her brain sent. She knelt in the snow, swaying, trying to remember why she needed to stand. The wind howled around her, and she thought she heard voices in it. Perhaps her father was calling to her. Perhaps death would not be so terrible if it meant seeing him again. She slumped forward, her cheek coming to rest against snow that no longer felt cold. In fact, nothing felt cold anymore. She felt almost warm, almost comfortable, and some distant part of her mind recognized this as the final warning before the end. The darkness that crept in from the edges of her vision seemed welcoming. Miranda's eyes drifted closed. She thought about her mother, dead these 10 years from influenza. She thought about her father and the kindness in his eyes. She thought about the life she might have lived if Thomas Chambers had been an honest man. Then she thought nothing at all as consciousness slipped away, and the snow continued to fall, covering her still form with a blanket of white. Benedict Porter guided his horse carefully through the storm, cursing the weather and his own stubborn nature in equal measure. He should have stayed in Bonanza when the snow started falling heavy around noon, should have waited out the worst of it at the hotel where he had sold 3 of his horses to the mining company. But Benedict had never been good at sitting idle, and his ranch lay only 15 miles west of town. He had figured he could make it home before dark if he pushed hard, and he knew these mountains like he knew the lines on his own hands. 26 years old and raised in these peaks, Benedict had learned to read weather and terrain from his father, who had established the Porter Ranch in 1867, when Benedict was just a boy. They raised horses primarily, sturdy mountain breeds that could handle the altitude and rough country, selling to miners, ranchers, and the occasional cavalry unit that came through. It was hard work but honest, and Benedict took pride in the reputation he had built for quality animals and fair dealing. The storm had worsened faster than he anticipated, though, and Benedict was forced to admit he had miscalculated. The trail he normally followed had disappeared under 2 feet of fresh snow, and visibility had dropped to perhaps 20 yards. His horse, a steady gelding named Grant, picked his way forward with the caution of an animal that knew the danger of a misstep in these conditions. Benedict trusted the horse's instincts more than his own at this point, giving Grant his head and concentrating on staying alert for any landmarks he might recognize. They had climbed higher than Benedict intended, the storm disorienting him more than he wanted to admit. He should be descending toward the valley where his ranch sat, but the terrain felt wrong. He pulled Grant to a halt, standing in the stirrups to survey what little he could see through the curtain of snow. The light was fading fast, and Benedict knew he needed to make a decision soon. He could try to push on and risk getting completely lost in the dark, or he could find shelter and wait for morning. The choice was made for him when Grant suddenly snorted and sidestepped, his ears pricked forward. Benedict followed the horse's gaze and saw nothing but snow and trees. But Grant was not a flighty animal, and something had caught his attention. Benedict dismounted, his boots sinking into the deep powder, and moved in the direction Grant indicated. Perhaps the horse had spotted a cabin or some other shelter. What he found instead was a body. At first Benedict thought it was simply a snow-covered log or rock, but as he approached, his heart lurched with recognition. It was a person, and from the clothing and long dark hair visible where the wind had blown snow clear, it was a woman. She lay curled on her side, partially buried in a drift, completely motionless. Benedict dropped to his knees beside her, pulling off his glove to press fingers against her throat. For a terrible moment he felt nothing, and then he detected it, the faintest flutter of pulse, slow and weak but present. "You're safe now," he said, though he knew she could not hear him. The words came automatically, a promise he intended to keep. Benedict assessed the situation with the quick calculation of a man accustomed to emergencies. She was barely alive, hypothermic to a dangerous degree, and would die without immediate intervention. He could not build a fire in this wind and snow, could not treat her here. He needed to get her to shelter, and fast. Benedict scooped the woman into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. She was small-boned and slender, though he could see evidence of recent hardship in her too thin frame. Her skin was white as the snow around them, her lips blue, her breathing so shallow he had to watch carefully to confirm her chest still rose and fell. He carried her to Grant, who stood steady despite the added burden, and Benedict carefully positioned her across the saddle. He swung up behind her, arranging her in front of him so he could hold her secure with one arm while managing the reins with the other. "Easy, boy," he murmured to Grant. "We need shelter, and we need it now." Benedict tried to recall what he knew of the area. If they had climbed as high as he suspected, there should be an old line shack somewhere nearby, a small cabin maintained by ranchers who ran cattle in the high country during summer months. He had used it himself a few times over the years. The challenge was finding it in these conditions, but it represented his best option. He could not make it back to Bonanza, could not reach his own ranch, and he certainly could not survive a night in the open with an unconscious woman who was already half frozen. He gave Grant his head again, trusting the horse to find easier ground, while Benedict focused on the woman in his arms. He pulled her closer, trying to share his body heat, knowing that every minute counted. Her breathing remained terribly shallow, and she showed no signs of awareness. Benedict had seen men die from cold during harsh winters, had once helped dig out a prospector who had been caught in an early-season storm. They had found the man too late, frozen solid, his face peaceful as if he had simply fallen asleep. Benedict refused to let that be this woman's fate. "Stay with me," he urged, his lips close to her ear. "Don't you give up. I've got you. You're safe now." The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Grant trudged through the snow. Benedict's own face grew numb despite his hat and scarf, and he worried about frostbite on his exposed cheeks. The woman he held grew colder against him, and he could no longer tell if she still breathed. He pressed his cheek against her face, trying to feel any whisper of breath, and thought he detected the faintest warmth. Just when Benedict had begun to fear they would all perish in the storm, Grant snorted and stopped. Benedict looked up and could have shouted with relief. There, barely visible through the snow, stood the dark shape of the lined shack. It was small and rough, but it had 4 walls and a roof, and right now it looked better than any palace. He dismounted carefully, keeping the woman secure, then carried her to the door. The shack was unlocked, as was the custom. These shelters existed for exactly this kind of emergency, and the unwritten law of the mountains was that they remained accessible to anyone in need. Benedict kicked the door open and carried his burden inside, out of the wind at last. The interior was dark and almost as cold as the outside, but at least the walls blocked the worst of the wind. Benedict laid the woman on the single narrow bunk that occupied one wall, then moved with practiced efficiency to start a fire. There was kindling and split wood stacked beside the small iron stove, and within minutes he had flames crackling. The shack began to warm slowly, though Benedict knew it would take time for the heat to really penetrate the cold that had settled into the small space. He turned his attention to the woman, his hands working quickly to assess her condition. Her clothes were soaked through, frozen in places, and he knew he needed to get her out of them. This presented a delicate situation, but Benedict had no room for modesty when her life hung in the balance. He worked as clinically as possible, removing her cloak, her dress, her undergarments, trying not to think about the intimacy of the act. He wrapped her in the 2 wool blankets he found in a trunk beneath the bunk, then added his own heavy coat on top. Her skin remained deathly pale, her pulse weak and thready when he checked again. Benedict knew that in cases of severe hypothermia, warming had to happen gradually, or the shock could stop the heart. He added more wood to the stove, bringing the temperature in the shack up slowly, then settled himself on the edge of the bunk. He chafed her hands gently, trying to encourage circulation, watching her face for any sign of returning consciousness. "Come on," he urged. "You're safe now. You're warm. You just need to wake up." An hour passed, then 2. Benedict kept the fire burning, kept watch over the woman, and gradually began to see signs of improvement. Color returned to her cheeks, pink at first, then a more natural hue. Her breathing deepened and strengthened. Her fingers, which had been frighteningly cold when he first touched them, grew warmer. Finally, as night settled fully over the mountains and the storm continued to rage outside, her eyelids fluttered. Benedict leaned closer, his heart beating faster. "Can you hear me? You're safe. You're in a cabin, out of the storm." Her eyes opened slowly, revealing irises of deep brown that reminded Benedict of polished walnut. Confusion clouded those eyes at first, then fear as she realized she was in an unfamiliar place with a strange man. She tried to sit up, tried to pull away, but her movements were weak and uncoordinated. "Easy," Benedict said, holding his hands up to show he meant no harm. "You're safe. I found you in the snow. You were freezing to death. I brought you here to the line shack to warm up." She stared at him, her breathing quickening with anxiety. Her gaze darted around the small cabin, taking in the stove, the rough walls, the single room with nowhere to hide. When she looked down and realized she wore only blankets, new panic flashed across her face. "Your clothes were soaked," Benedict explained, trying to keep his voice calm and reassuring. "I had to remove them or you would have died from the cold. I did not. I was respectful. They're drying by the fire now. See." He gestured to where her garments hung on a rope he had strung near the stove. She followed his gesture, then looked back at him, still uncertain. When she spoke, her voice came out as barely a whisper, rough from cold and disuse. "Who are you?" "Benedict Porter. I have a ranch west of Bonanza. I was heading home when the storm hit, got turned around in the mountains, and my horse found you. That was about 3 hours ago now. You were unconscious, barely breathing. I brought you here because you would not have survived another hour out there." She processed this information, her eyes never leaving his face as if trying to judge his truthfulness. "Why?" The question surprised Benedict. "Why what? Why did I help you?" She nodded, a small movement of her head against the rough blanket. "Because you needed help," Benedict said simply. "I could not just leave you there to die. What kind of man would do that?" Tears suddenly welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. The fear in her expression shifted to something else, something that looked like relief mixed with grief. She turned her face away from him, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Benedict felt helpless in the face of her tears. He wanted to comfort her but knew his presence might not be welcome. Instead, he rose and moved to the stove, busying himself with heating water in a battered tin pot he found on a shelf. When it was hot, he added some coffee grounds from a can in the cupboard, the aroma filling the small space. "Can you sit up?" he asked. "Some hot coffee might help." She wiped at her face with the edge of the blanket and nodded. Benedict helped her shift to a sitting position, keeping the blankets wrapped around her, propping her against the wall where she could lean back. He handed her a tin cup of coffee, and she wrapped both hands around it, savoring the warmth. She took a tentative sip, then another, and Benedict saw some strength returning to her features. They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of wind outside. Finally, she spoke again, her voice stronger now. "I am Miranda Keller. Pleased to meet you, Miss Keller, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Benedict paused, then asked carefully, "What were you doing out in that storm? Bonanza is the closest town, and it is a hard climb up to where I found you." Her hands tightened on the cup, and Benedict saw fear flash across her face again. She looked down at the dark liquid, clearly wrestling with how much to tell him. "I was running," she said finally, "from someone who means me harm." Benedict felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. "Who?" "A man named Vincent Chambers. He blames me for his brother's imprisonment. He came to Bonanza looking for me today, and I had to flee." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "I knew he would have men watching the main road, so I went into the mountains. I thought I could hide in the forest until dark, then circle around, but the storm got worse and I became lost." "Vincent Chambers," Benedict repeated, searching his memory. "I heard something about a trial in Denver. Banking fraud," Miranda nodded. "My father discovered that the Chambers family was embezzling from the bank where he worked. Before he could testify, he died. They claimed it was an accident, but I know Vincent and Thomas were behind it. I testified in my father's place, and Thomas was convicted. Vincent swore he would make me pay for destroying his family." The pieces fell into place in Benedict's mind. This woman had stood up for what was right despite the danger, had honored her father's memory by ensuring justice was served, and now she was paying the price for her courage. The injustice of it stirred anger in his chest. Men like the Chambers brothers operated with impunity too often in the territories, using money and intimidation to escape consequences for their actions. "You did the right thing," Benedict said firmly. "Your testimony was brave." "Brave or foolish," Miranda said bitterly. "It cost me everything. I have been running for 3 months now, hiding in different towns, always looking over my shoulder. I thought I was safe in Bonanza, but he found me anyway." "The storm will keep him from following tonight," Benedict said. "By morning, your tracks will be completely covered. He will have no way of knowing which direction you went. But I cannot stay in Bonanza. He will be watching, waiting. I have to leave Colorado entirely, start over somewhere else." Her voice held the weariness of someone who had been running too long. Benedict made a decision in that moment, one that surprised him but felt absolutely right. "You can stay at my ranch, at least until we figure out a better plan. The storm should clear by tomorrow, and I can get you there safely. My ranch is isolated off the main trails. Chambers would have no reason to look there, and even if he did, he would have to go through me to get to you." Miranda looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Why would you do that? You do not know me." "I am nothing but trouble. You are a woman in need of help," Benedict said, "and I have room. My father died 2 years ago, and it is just me now. I have a housekeeper who comes in 3 times a week from the neighboring ranch, but otherwise it is pretty quiet. You would be safe there while you recover and make plans." "I have very little money," Miranda warned. "I could not pay you much for room and board." "I am not asking for payment. I am offering help." Benedict met her eyes steadily. "You have been through hell, Miss Keller. You nearly died today. Let someone help you for once without expecting anything in return." The tears came again, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than despair. Miranda set down her coffee cup and covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Benedict looked away, giving her privacy in her emotion, adding more wood to the stove even though it did not need it. When she had composed herself, Miranda spoke in a voice thick with feeling. "Thank you. I accept your offer, at least until I can figure out what to do next. I will not be a burden, I promise. I can cook and clean, help around the ranch however I can." "We will work out the details later," Benedict said. "For now, you need to rest and get your strength back. The storm will probably blow itself out by morning, and we can head to the ranch then. It is only about 10 miles from here. Much easier country than what you tried to cross today." Miranda nodded and carefully lay back down on the bunk, pulling the blankets up to her chin. Her eyes were already heavy with exhaustion, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally draining away now that she was safe and warm. Benedict watched as she drifted toward sleep, her breathing evening out, the tension leaving her face. He settled himself on the floor near the stove, his back against the wall, prepared for an uncomfortable night. But discomfort was a small price to pay for saving a life. As the wind howled outside and snow piled against the cabin walls, Benedict found himself thinking about the woman sleeping a few feet away. She was beautiful, even pale and exhausted as she had been when he found her. More than that, though, she had shown courage and integrity in standing up to the Chambers brothers. Those were qualities Benedict admired. He tried not to let his thoughts wander too far down that path. Miranda Keller was a woman in trouble, seeking refuge, and he had offered help as any decent person would. She was not a romantic prospect, no matter how striking her dark eyes or how her bravery stirred something in his chest. She was simply someone who needed assistance, and he would provide it without expectation or complication. Still, as Benedict drifted toward sleep, he could not help but wonder what the morning would bring. The storm would pass, and he would take Miranda to his ranch, give her a safe place to stay. Beyond that, the future remained uncertain. Vincent Chambers would not give up his hunt easily, and Miranda would need protection. Benedict had offered that protection on impulse, driven by the immediate need to help, but he was beginning to realize the commitment he had made was not a simple one. The fire crackled in the stove, and outside the wind began to ease as the storm moved south. Benedict's last thought before sleep claimed him was that sometimes life presented opportunities disguised as emergencies, and perhaps finding Miranda Keller half frozen in the snow was one of those moments that would change everything. Morning came with bright sunlight streaming through the single window of the lined shack, turning the snow outside into a dazzling expanse of white. Benedict woke stiff and sore from sleeping on the hard floor, but he rose quickly and added wood to the stove to warm the cabin against the bitter cold. Miranda still slept, her breathing steady and healthy, and Benedict decided to let her rest while he checked on Grant and assessed the weather. He pulled on his boots and coat and stepped outside into a transformed world. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind crystal-clear skies and at least 2 feet of fresh snow. Grant stood in the lean-to attached to the side of the shack, a crude shelter but enough to keep the worst of the weather off. The horse nickered a greeting and Benedict rubbed his nose affectionately. "You saved a life yesterday, boy," Benedict murmured. "You found her when I would have ridden right past." He gave Grant some oats from the supply kept in the lean-to, then returned to the cabin. Miranda was awake now, sitting up on the bunk with the blankets wrapped around her. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, dark and wavy, and in the morning light, Benedict could see that she was even prettier than he had realized the night before. She looked young, probably not more than 22 or 23, though the experiences of recent months had added shadows beneath her eyes. "Good morning," Benedict said. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Miranda admitted. "And embarrassed. I can hardly believe I nearly died yesterday. I thought I knew better than to go into the mountains in a storm, but I was panicking and not thinking clearly." "You were being hunted by a dangerous man. Panic is understandable." Benedict checked her clothes hanging by the stove. They were dry now, and he gathered them, turning his back to give her privacy. "Your things are ready. I will step outside while you dress, then we can have some breakfast before we head to the ranch." He busied himself outside for several minutes, giving her time. When he returned, Miranda was fully dressed, her hair pulled back into a simple braid, trying to smooth the wrinkles from her dress. She looked embarrassed but determined, her chin lifted in a way that suggested she had decided not to let her circumstances defeat her spirit. Benedict prepared a simple breakfast of hardtack and coffee, wishing he had something more substantial to offer. They ate in companionable silence, and then Benedict helped Miranda outside and onto Grant. He swung up behind her, and they set off down the mountain toward the valley where his ranch sat. The journey took several hours, as Grant had to pick his way carefully through the deep snow. Benedict pointed out landmarks as they traveled, explaining the geography of the area, trying to make conversation to distract Miranda from any lingering fears. She responded with polite interest, asking questions about the ranch and how long his family had been in Colorado. "My father came out in 1867, right after the war," Benedict explained. "He had served with the Union cavalry and knew horses. He figured Colorado territory needed good stock for the miners and ranchers moving in. He found this valley with good grass and water, built a cabin that first year and started breeding. I have expanded the operation some since he passed, but it is still primarily horses." "It must be hard running it alone," Miranda observed. "I manage." The Hendersons have a ranch about 5 miles east, and they help out sometimes. Their daughter Sarah comes over to cook and clean a few days a week, keeps the place from becoming a complete bachelor disaster. Benedict grinned. Though I will admit my housekeeping leaves something to be desired. They crested a ridge and Benedict pointed down into the valley below. There. That is home. Miranda followed his gesture and caught her breath. The Porter Ranch spread across a sheltered valley with a solid log house at its center, smoke rising from the chimney. Corrals and outbuildings surrounded the house, and Benedict could see some of his horses moving in the near pasture, dark shapes against the snow. Mountains rose on all sides, creating a natural fortress, and a creek ran through the property, visible as a dark ribbon winding through the white landscape. "It is beautiful," Miranda said softly, "like something from a painting." Pride warmed Benedict's chest. He loved this place, had poured his life into building it up, and hearing someone else appreciate it meant more than he expected. They descended into the valley, and as they approached the house, the front door opened and a woman stepped out onto the porch. Sarah Henderson stood with her hands on her hips, her expression stern. She was a few years older than Benedict, married with 3 children, and she treated him with the mixture of affection and exasperation usually reserved for younger brothers. "Benedict Porter, I have been worried sick. When you did not come home yesterday and that storm blew in, I thought you were dead in a drift somewhere. I got caught up near the divide," Benedict explained, dismounting and helping Miranda down. "I took shelter in the line shack and rode out the storm. Sarah, this is Miss Miranda Keller. I found her in the snow yesterday. She was fleeing from some trouble in Bonanza, and I have offered her refuge here for a while." Sarah's expression shifted immediately from stern to concerned as she took in Miranda's appearance. "Oh, you poor dear. Come inside where it is warm. You look half frozen still." She ushered Miranda toward the house, talking a steady stream about hot soup and warm beds, leaving Benedict to care for Grant. By the time Benedict had unsaddled the horse, rubbed him down, and made sure all the animals had food and water, nearly an hour had passed. He returned to the house to find it transformed. Sarah had clearly taken charge, and wonderful smells drifted from the kitchen. He found Miranda seated at the kitchen table wrapped in a quilt, her hands around a cup of tea, while Sarah bustled about preparing food and talking about everything and nothing. "I was just telling Miss Keller that she is welcome to stay in the spare room for as long as she needs," Sarah said, giving Benedict a significant look. "It is proper for her to have her own space, and that room has a good stove and a comfortable bed." "Of course," Benedict agreed, taking off his hat and coat. He understood what Sarah was really saying. A single woman and a single man living alone together would cause talk, and while Benedict had offered help with no ulterior motives, he knew how things could look. Having Sarah around to maintain propriety was important, both for Miranda's reputation and his own. They sat down to a meal of soup and fresh bread that Sarah must have brought from her own kitchen, and Benedict watched as Miranda ate with the appetite of someone who had not had a proper meal in too long. Color had returned fully to her cheeks, and she smiled at something Sarah said, the expression transforming her face. Benedict found himself staring and had to force his attention back to his own plate. After the meal, Sarah showed Miranda to the spare room, a comfortable space with a bed, dresser, and small stove. Benedict could hear them talking through the walls as Sarah helped Miranda settle in, offering clothes that might fit, promising to bring more supplies from her own house. When Sarah finally emerged, she found Benedict in the main room and fixed him with a penetrating stare. "That girl has been through something terrible," Sarah said quietly. "She told me a bit about her father and the trial while you were tending the horses." You did right by bringing her here, Benedict, but you realize this could get complicated. I know, but I could not leave her to die, and I could not send her back to Bonanza where that Chambers man is looking for her. She needed help, Sarah. I am not criticizing, Sarah assured him. Just making sure you understand what you have taken on. This Vincent Chambers sounds dangerous. If he tracks her here, there could be trouble. Let him come, Benedict said, his voice harder than usual. This is my land and she is under my protection now. He will not touch her. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right then. I will come by every day for the next week or so, help Miss Keller get settled, make sure everything stays proper. John will understand. Her husband was a good man, Benedict knew, who would support his wife helping someone in need. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. Sarah left an hour later, promising to return the next morning with more clothes and supplies. Benedict found himself alone in the house with Miranda, a situation that felt both natural and strange. He could hear her moving around in the spare room, settling in, and he tried to focus on the ranch ledgers that needed updating. But his mind kept drifting to the woman in the next room, to how vulnerable she had looked lying in the snow, to how her eyes had filled with tears when he promised she was safe. That evening, Miranda emerged from her room to help prepare supper. Benedict protested that she should rest, but she insisted on being useful. They worked together in the kitchen, a surprisingly easy partnership, and Benedict found himself enjoying her company. She was intelligent and well-spoken, with a dry sense of humor that emerged as she grew more comfortable. She told him more about her father, about growing up in Denver, about her work at various boarding houses as she had fled across Colorado. I miss having a purpose, she admitted as they ate. These past months, I have just been surviving, moving from place to place, never able to settle or make real plans. I miss feeling like my life means something. It means something, Benedict said firmly. You stood up for justice when it would have been easier to stay silent. You honored your father's memory and helped put a criminal in prison. That matters, Miranda. Do not ever think it does not. She looked at him with such gratitude that Benedict felt his heart skip. This was dangerous territory, he realized. He was already beginning to care for this woman, to feel protective of her in ways that went beyond simple hospitality. He needed to be careful, to maintain appropriate boundaries, to remember that she was a guest seeking refuge and nothing more. But as the days passed and turned into weeks, Benedict found it increasingly difficult to maintain that emotional distance. Miranda became part of the rhythm of the ranch, rising early to help with breakfast, tending the house, even venturing out to the barn to learn about the horses. She had a natural way with animals, and the horses responded to her gentle touch. Benedict caught himself watching her as she brushed down one of the mares, her voice soft as she talked to the animal, and he had to force himself to look away. Sarah noticed, of course. She cornered Benedict one morning while Miranda was in town with Sarah's husband, purchasing supplies. You are falling for her, Sarah said bluntly. Do not try to deny it. I can see it in how you look at her. Benedict wanted to protest, but he found he could not lie to Sarah. Maybe, he admitted, but it does not matter. She has been through too much, needs time to heal. The last thing she needs is me complicating her life with unwanted attention. What makes you think it would be unwanted? Sarah asked. I have seen how she looks at you too, Benedict. That girl cares for you. She feels safe with you, and that is starting to become something more. I saved her life. She is grateful, that is all. Once she heals, once she is ready to move on with her life, she will leave and forget all about me. The thought pained Benedict more than he wanted to admit. You are a fool if you believe that, Sarah said, but I suppose you will figure it out in your own time. Just do not wait too long, Benedict. Good women do not come along that often, and Miranda is special. Anyone can see that. Spring came slowly to the high country, and with it, Miranda's strength fully returned. She had been at the ranch for nearly 3 months, and in that time, she had transformed from a frightened fugitive into a confident woman who smiled easily and laughed often. Benedict could hardly remember what life had been like before she arrived, could not imagine the house without her presence. They had settled into a comfortable partnership, working side by side on ranch tasks, sharing meals, talking late into the evening about everything from books they had read to dreams they harbored. Benedict learned that Miranda loved poetry and could recite entire passages from Wordsworth and Keats. She learned that Benedict had once wanted to be a teacher, but had stayed on the ranch when his father's health failed. The attraction between them had grown impossible to ignore. It was there in the way Miranda's hand lingered when she passed Benedict a plate at supper, in how his fingers brushed hers when they both reached for the same tool. It was in the looks they exchanged across the barn, the conversations that lasted until the fire burned low, the comfortable silences that spoke volumes. But neither of them acknowledged it directly. Benedict still feared pushing too hard, too fast. And Miranda seemed hesitant to complicate the sanctuary she had found. Vincent Chambers had not appeared, and as the weeks passed, Miranda began to believe she might truly be safe at last. Then one afternoon in early May, everything changed. Benedict was working in the far pasture when he saw a rider approaching the ranch house. Something about the man's purposeful pace set off warning bells, and Benedict spurred his own horse into a gallop, racing back toward home. He arrived to find a stranger dismounting at the front porch, and Benedict recognized the cold, calculating expression of a man accustomed to violence. "Can I help you?" Benedict asked, his voice hard as he positioned himself between the stranger and the house. "Name is Vincent Chambers," the man said, confirming Benedict's worst fears. "I am looking for a woman named Miranda Keller. I have information that she might be staying here." "You have been misinformed," Benedict said flatly. "There is no one by that name at this ranch." Vincent smiled, a cold expression that held no humor. "Now, I do not think that is entirely true. You see, I have been asking around. The people in Bonanza remember a cowboy who bought horses the day Miranda disappeared. They remember you, Mr. Porter. And when I made inquiries about who might shelter a fugitive, your name came up. You have a reputation as a man who helps those in need. Miss Keller is not a fugitive. She testified truthfully in a court of law, and your brother was convicted because he is guilty. She has done nothing wrong, and you have no right to harass her. My brother is rotting in prison because of lies that woman told," Vincent snarled, his false pleasantness dropping away. "She destroyed my family, and she will pay for it. Now, I am going to search this property, and you are going to let me." "The hell I am," Benedict said, his hand moving to rest on the revolver at his hip. "This is my land, and you are trespassing. You have 10 seconds to get back on that horse and ride away, or we are going to have a problem." Vincent's eyes narrowed, and Benedict saw his hand twitch toward his own gun. The moment stretched tight as a wire, and Benedict prepared himself for violence. But before either man could draw, the front door opened and Miranda stepped onto the porch. "Do not," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Vincent, I will talk to you. Just leave Benedict out of this." "Miranda, no," Benedict started, but she cut him off with a look. "I am done running," she said. "I have been running for months, living in fear, hiding. It ends now." She turned to Vincent, lifting her chin. "I told the truth at that trial. Your brother embezzled money, and when my father discovered it, Thomas had him killed. I will never apologize for seeking justice for my father's murder." "Justice?" Vincent spat the word. You destroyed my family for your own revenge." "No," Miranda said firmly. "Your brother destroyed your family when he chose crime over integrity. I simply made sure he faced consequences for his actions. And if you hurt me, Vincent, it will not change anything. Thomas will still be in prison and you will be a murderer. Is that really what you want? To prove you are just like him." Benedict watched Vincent's face, saw the conflict there. The man had spent months hunting Miranda, driven by rage and the need for vengeance. But now, confronted with her directly, hearing her words, something seemed to crack in his certainty. "My brother was not a murderer," Vincent said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then prove it," Miranda challenged. "Go back to Denver. Demand a new investigation into my father's death. If Thomas is innocent, the evidence will show it. But you know he is not, do not you? Deep down, you know your brother was capable of murder just as he was capable of theft. You are just afraid to admit it." The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent stood frozen, his hand still near his gun, his face working with emotion. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged. "He always was the reckless one," Vincent said quietly, almost to himself. "Even when we were boys, he would do anything to get what he wanted, never thinking about the consequences." "I am sorry for what happened to your family," Miranda said, and Benedict heard genuine compassion in her voice. "But my father is dead, Vincent. He died for trying to do the right thing, and I will not apologize for finishing what he started." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, then at Benedict, then back at Miranda. "You are right," he said finally. "This will not bring Thomas back or change what he did. I have been chasing vengeance because I did not know what else to do with my anger." He took a step back toward his horse. "I will leave you in peace, Miss Keller, and I am sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man. Better than my brother deserved." He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Benedict and Miranda stood on the porch, watching until he disappeared over the ridge. Then Miranda's legs seemed to give out, and Benedict caught her as she swayed. He helped her inside to a chair, his heart pounding with residual adrenaline. "That was incredibly brave," Benedict said, kneeling beside her chair. "And incredibly foolish. He could have shot you." "But he did not," Miranda said, and Benedict saw tears streaming down her face. Not tears of fear, but of relief. "It is over, Benedict. It is finally over. I can stop running. I can stop being afraid." Benedict pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried, and he felt his own eyes burning with emotion. She was safe, truly safe at last. And the realization of what that meant hit him like a physical force. She could leave now. She could return to Denver or go anywhere she wanted, start her life over without fear. She no longer needed his protection or his ranch. The thought of her leaving felt like a knife to his chest. When her tears subsided, Miranda pulled back to look at him, and Benedict saw something shift in her expression. Her hands came up to frame his face, and she looked at him with an intensity that stole his breath. "Benedict Porter," she said softly, "you saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go, protection when I needed it, and kindness when I had forgotten such things existed. You gave me back myself. How can I ever repay that?" "You do not owe me anything," Benedict managed, acutely aware of her hands on his face, of how close she was. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Miranda said. "You did what a truly good man would do, and somewhere along the way in these past months I have fallen hopelessly in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and Benedict felt his heart stop and restart. "Miranda," he whispered. "Are you sure? You have been through so much. I do not want you to confuse gratitude with love." "I am not confused," she said firmly. "I know the difference between gratitude and love, Benedict. I am grateful to Sarah for her kindness, but I do not love her the way I love you." I am grateful for this ranch giving me sanctuary, but I do not dream about corrals and horses the way I dream about you. I love you, Benedict. Not because you saved me, but because of who you are. Your integrity, your gentleness with animals, the way you always try to do right by people even when it costs you. I love how you read poetry badly and make terrible coffee and get this look on your face when you think I am not watching. I love you, and if you do not feel the same, I will accept that, but I had to tell you the truth. Benedict felt like his chest might burst with the emotions flooding through him. I love you too, he said, the words coming out rough with feeling. I have loved you since the moment you opened your eyes in that lined shack, and I saw your strength shining through despite everything you had endured. I have been falling more in love with you every single day, and the thought of you leaving now that you are safe was breaking my heart. Then I will not leave, Miranda said simply. If you will have me, I will stay, not as a guest or someone seeking refuge, but as a woman who wants to build a life with you. Benedict kissed her then, pouring months of restrained longing into the contact. Miranda kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, and Benedict felt like he was drowning in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast and we should probably court properly, but I do not want to wait. Marry me, Miranda. Be my wife, my partner in all things. Help me run this ranch, raise horses, build the life we both deserve." "Yes," Miranda breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the church in Bonanza, with Sarah and her family as witnesses. Miranda wore a dress Sarah had sewn, simple but beautiful, and Benedict had never seen anything more lovely than his bride walking toward him with joy shining in her eyes. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when Benedict kissed his new bride, he felt like the luckiest man in all of Colorado territory. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and simple pleasures. Miranda proved to be an excellent partner in the ranch operation, with a head for figures that helped them expand the horse breeding program. She started keeping accounts properly, something Benedict had always been lax about, and within 2 years they had increased their profits substantially. Their first child arrived in the spring of 1885, a healthy boy they named William after Miranda's father. Benedict held his son for the first time and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known possible. Miranda proved to be a wonderful mother, patient and loving, and Benedict often found himself simply watching his wife and son together, marveling at the family they had built. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, dark-haired like her mother, and they named her Rose. She was a spirited child who learned to ride almost before she could walk properly, and Benedict loved watching her fearless enthusiasm for life. A second son followed in 1889, whom they named James, and their family felt complete. The Porter Ranch continued to prosper. Benedict's reputation for quality horses spread throughout Colorado and beyond, and they sold stock to buyers from as far away as Wyoming and New Mexico. Miranda handled much of the business correspondence, her education and intelligence proving invaluable. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, and Sarah's children spent so much time at the Porter Ranch that they felt like extended family. Sometimes, usually late at night when the children were asleep and Benedict and Miranda sat together on the porch watching stars wheel overhead, they would talk about that winter day when he found her in the snow. It seemed like another lifetime, those desperate months when Miranda had been running and alone. But Benedict never forgot how close he had come to losing her before he even knew she existed, how easily he might have ridden past without seeing her, how Grant's instincts had saved not just Miranda's life, but Benedict's future happiness. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not found me?" Miranda asked one such night, her head resting on Benedict's shoulder. "Every day," Benedict admitted. "And every day I thank God that I took the trail I did, that the storm turned me around, that Grant was paying better attention than I was. You and the children are everything to me, Miranda. I cannot imagine my life without you." "You saved me," Miranda said softly. "Not just from the cold, but from despair. I had lost so much, had been running for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be safe, to be loved. You gave that back to me." "We saved each other," Benedict corrected, tilting her face up to kiss her gently. "I was existing, not really living. Going through the motions of running the ranch without any real purpose beyond the next day's work. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, a future worth planning for. You gave me a family, Miranda. You gave me everything." In 1892, when Colorado achieved statehood, Benedict and Miranda stood with their children on the main street of Bonanza watching the celebrations. William was 7, Rose 5, and James 3, and they bounced with excitement at the fireworks and music. Benedict held Miranda's hand and thought about how far they had come, both as individuals and as a couple. From that desperate flight through a winter storm to this moment of stability and joy, the journey had been remarkable. Vincent Chambers never bothered them again. Benedict heard through the grapevine that Vincent had returned to Denver and had actually reopened the investigation into William Keller's death. The new evidence had confirmed what Miranda always knew, that Thomas Chambers had arranged the murder to silence a witness. Vincent had apparently made some sort of peace with the truth and had sold his family's holdings, moving east to start over away from the scandal. As the years rolled on, the Porter children grew and thrived. William showed an aptitude for working with horses that rivaled his father's, and at 16, he was already helping to train the more difficult animals. Rose proved to have her mother's head for business, and she often assisted Miranda with the accounts and correspondence. James was still young, but he showed signs of the same quiet integrity that marked his father. The ranch itself became one of the most successful operations in the region. Benedict never forgot his roots or the help he had received along the way, and he made it a policy to assist others when they needed it. More than once, the Porter Ranch provided refuge for someone in trouble, a tradition that started with Miranda and continued, because both Benedict and Miranda believed in paying forward the kindness they had received. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benedict surprised Miranda with a gift he had been planning for months. He took her hand and led her to the barn, where a beautiful chestnut mare waited in one of the stalls. The horse was exceptional, with perfect conformation and a gentle temperament, and Benedict had paid a premium to acquire her from a breeder in Wyoming. "She is yours," Benedict said. "I know you have been riding whatever horse was available, but I wanted you to have one that was truly your own. Something special because you are special." Miranda's eyes filled with tears as she approached the mare, who nuzzled her hand gently. "Benedict, she is perfect. What is her name?" "That is for you to decide. She is your horse, your choice." Miranda thought for a moment, then smiled. "Grace." "I will call her Grace, because that is what you have shown me every day we have been together. Grace and love and patience." They stood together in the barn, their children playing in the yard outside, the ranch bustling with activity around them, and Benedict pulled his wife close. "I love you," he said. "More now than the day I married you, which I would not have thought possible. You are my everything, Miranda Porter." "And you are mine," she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. "My cowboy, my hero, my heart. Thank you for finding me in the snow all those years ago. Thank you for saying I was safe. and thank you for making it true every single day since." The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children's lives. William married a local rancher's daughter when he was 22, a good woman named Elizabeth who fit seamlessly into the Porter family. They built a house on the eastern section of the ranch and began raising their own family, giving Benedict and Miranda their first grandchild in 1898. Rose showed no interest in marriage, preferring instead to focus on expanding the ranch's business operations. She had a keen mind for breeding lines and market trends, and under her guidance, the Porter Ranch began shipping horses as far as California. Benedict was immensely proud of his daughter's accomplishments, and he made sure she had a full partnership in the ranch operation. James followed in his brother's footsteps with horses, but he also showed an interest in the political changes sweeping the young state of Colorado. He talked about perhaps running for local office someday, about using his position to help ensure fair treatment for all citizens. Miranda encouraged his ambitions, seeing in her youngest child some of the same idealism that had driven her father. By the turn of the century, Benedict and Miranda were in their early 40s, their hair showing threads of silver, their faces lined with the marks of years spent working outdoors. But they were happy, surrounded by family and the fruits of their labor, and they still looked at each other with the same love that had blossomed during that winter so many years ago. Sometimes visitors to the ranch would ask how Benedict and Miranda had met, and they would exchange a smile before Miranda would answer. "Benedict saved my life during a blizzard," she would say. "I was lost in the mountains, freezing to death, and he found me and told me I was safe. And I have been safe ever since, safe and loved and blessed beyond measure." Benedict would always add, "But she saved me too, saved me from a half-life of going through the motions. She gave me purpose and joy and a reason to wake up every morning grateful for another day." It was the truth, simple and profound. Two people who might never have met under ordinary circumstances, brought together by crisis and choice, building something beautiful from the foundation of that desperate night. A love story born in snow and fear, nurtured through months of careful trust, blooming into a partnership that defined both their lives. On a warm summer evening in 1905, Benedict and Miranda sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their grandchildren played in the yard, and smoke rose from the chimney of William's house down the valley. The ranch was prosperous, their family was healthy, and peace had settled over their lives like a warm blanket. "You have any regrets?" Miranda asked, her hand in Benedict's as it had been countless times over the 20-plus years of their marriage. Benedict thought about the question seriously. He thought about the choices he had made, the paths he had taken, the life he had built. "Not a single one," he said finally. "Except maybe that I did not kiss you sooner that first day you told me you loved me. I wasted at least 3 hours being cautious when I could have been kissing my future wife." Miranda laughed, the sound as sweet to Benedict now as it had been when he first heard it. 3 hours. "That is your only regret." "It is a serious regret," Benedict protested with mock solemnity. 3 hours is 180 minutes, which is 10,800 seconds of potential kissing that we will never get back. "Well then," Miranda said, turning to face him with love shining in her eyes, "we had better not waste any more time." She kissed him as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Benedict thought that this moment, like so many moments over the years, was perfect. He had found her frozen in the snow, had told her she was safe, and together they had built a life that proved the truth of those words every single day. The ranch continued under the guidance of Benedict and Miranda Porter for many more years. They lived to see all their children married and settled, to welcome numerous grandchildren, and to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of family. The love that had begun in desperation and bloomed in sanctuary remained strong through every challenge they faced, every joy they celebrated, every ordinary day they spent side by side. When Benedict finally passed in his sleep at the age of 78, Miranda held his hand and whispered words of love and gratitude. She followed him 3 years later, peacefully, in the home they had built together, surrounded by the family that was their greatest legacy. Their children laid them to rest side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with headstones that bore simple inscriptions of their names and the dates that marked their lives. But the true monument to Benedict and Miranda Porter was not made of stone. It lived in the children they had raised, in the ranch that continued to thrive under family stewardship, in the dozens of people over the years who had found help and hope at their door. It lived in the story passed down through generations, of a cowboy who found a woman freezing in the snow and promised her safety, and of the love that grew from that promise into something that endured beyond their own lifetimes. The Porter Ranch still stands today, a testament to hard work, integrity, and the transformative power of love. And on winter nights when snow falls heavy in the Colorado mountains, people still tell the story of Benedict and Miranda, of how a moment of compassion in a blizzard changed 2 lives forever, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest words. "You're safe now."